What's up guys, it is Seth and welcome back to my channel. Today is part 2 of our layers deep dive video where we are going to be making this cool looking magical door. So it's going to kind of bring together everything we learned in the previous video, plus a few new tools just to help you start to get familiar with how to use layers to your advantage in Procreate. So part 1 of this video will be linked above for you guys and below in the description. So if you want to check that out before you start this video, feel free to. But if you want to just get started and hop straight into creating this, let's just do it. So grab your iPads, open up Procreate, and let's go. So here we are in our canvas. We will be starting with a screen size canvas. I already have my sketch loaded in. The sketch will be linked down in the description box for you to download. So once you download it, you can either import it in from your files, or if you save it as a PNG, like to your Photos app, you can just hit import photo and import it in. And just to quickly show you how you import a file in, go ahead and hit this wrench. This is your actions panel. So you're gonna open this up, make sure you're on the add tab, which is this first option here. And then if it's saved to your device, go ahead and hit insert file. And if it's saved to your Photos app or something like that, go ahead and hit insert a photo. So once you have your sketch in here, it should be on its own layer. Go ahead and rename that layer to sketch lines. Like you see, I already have mine renamed here. But if you want to rename it, tap the preview, hit rename, and just type in sketch lines, top layer, or something like that, just so you don't get it mixed up with other layers as we continue on. Once you have it renamed, go ahead and resize it. So the way you do that, hit your little move icon here. And we're just going to resize it so it looks like that on your screen. And if you don't have your snapping turned on, hit your move and just hit snapping down here. And make sure it's set like this. And that'll help you snap to like the middle of your canvas and to different points as you move throughout your art. Cool. So the first thing we're going to do here is make a kind of base shape for us to build the door up on top of. So we're just going to add a layer. Go ahead and rename it, since we're here, rename it base door shape. And once you have it renamed, we're going to use our selection tool over here to make a shape, so basically a rectangle that's underneath the lines here. So you can take your freehand tool or you can take the rectangular tool, whichever one you're more comfortable with. I'm just going to do freehand. I'm going to tap on our first pinpoint here. Tap to make that line. So you should see like the marching ants line kind of moving. That means you're starting to make a selection. Then we're just going to tap here. Tap. And one more tap where we started to close out our selection. And once you do that, you should start to see these little hatch marks here. That means you have successfully made a selection. So once you do that, we're just going to fill this shape with a random color. So I'm just going to go to my color picker here. I'm just going to grab, since I know I want my door to be green, eventually I'm just going to grab a green, but it literally can be any color. So actually, let me just show you. I can just do blue. So I'm going to take this color. You can hold from your color picker and drag the color over and drop it in. So now you can see our lines are gone because we made this perfectly shaped rectangle on top of our lines. We actually want our lines to be on top. So go back to your layers panel on your sketch lines, hold it and drag it to the top. So now our lines are back on top of our base shape and our base shape is on the bottom. And you just quickly want to check and make sure your base shape looks good, you know, nothing's leaking out anywhere where it shouldn't be. Yeah, we're good to go. So we're basically going to use this base shape to start building up everything on top to create the look of the door. All right, so now that we have our base shape in blue here, we are going to import in a photo texture. I love to use photo textures in my digital art. It just helps me achieve the look I'm going for faster. I mean, I could paint it all out if I really wanted to, but if you have the photo texture, you might as well use it. So we're going to use it today, and I'm going to show you how we build up on top of it to make it look how we want it to look. And I will have this texture also linked down below in the description if you want to just download the one I'm using, or you can go on Google or anything like that and just find some type of flaky, paint peely door texture if you want to use your own. Great, so we now have our texture imported in. It's gonna be on its own layer. As you can see, the move tool pops up when you import a photo in. So you can start to go ahead and just start manipulating your image how you see fit. So we're just gonna hit rotate 45 2 times. So it's gonna rotate us 90 degrees and get us going horizontal. And go ahead and scale this texture down to fit the parameters of the door a little bit better. As you can see, the knots on this are pretty big in comparison to the door. That's because this texture is like a zoomed in photo of texture. So we're just gonna make sure those knots are outside of the door. Because obviously if we put those inside the door, that means the wood is huge and the scale is wrong, and we just don't want that. So we're just gonna leave the knots here and here, just leave them on the outside of the door. So I like that position. We're gonna go here. Perfect. And then once we have it positioned how you want, you can just tap this. It'll exit out of your move option. So let's come back to our layers panel. You can see now it says inserted image, and that's sitting on top of the base door shape. So we're going to go ahead and rename this really quickly and just maybe put door base texture. So once you rename it, we're going to go ahead and clip it to the shape that's underneath. So we have this blue shape that's exactly the shape and dimensions of our door. Go ahead and make sure your texture is on top of that layer. Tap on your layer and then hit clipping mask. So as you can see, once we hit that, Procreate basically just clipped that door texture to the shape of the door that we created earlier. Now right here, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the color of my door because I don't necessarily want it to be blue. Actually, I mean, I don't mind the blue, but I think we're going to go for like a green. I want to do a green. But you can make your color anything you want to do. So the way we're going to do this is go to our adjustments panel, which is up here. It's a little wand with a little sparkle. Hit that. We're going to go to hue, saturation, brightness. Going to pop up this menu at the bottom here. And then go ahead and just adjust your hue until you find a color that works for you. Whatever color you want to do. And obviously this is like a really, really bright green. So I just kind of want to desaturate it a little bit just to, yeah, somewhere in there. So I desaturated mine by about 10%, but it depends on the image that you import in. But if you like it to be more saturated, feel free to do so. We're going to call that good. So tap out of that. We're just going to come back to our screen. So as you can see, the image already created like a really, really good start for us to make this door look very believable in how we want it to look. So we're just going to build on top of this using the layers and different effects to make it look dimensional and more realistic. So let's go ahead and do that. So go ahead and create another layer. Let's go ahead and clip it to the door. What we're going to do now is just add a little bit more of the distressing into the door and other places where like the door frame is and things like that. So we're going to use some brushes and Procreate to help us achieve that look. So if we zoom in a little bit, I'm going to try to find this color here that's kind of where the paint is peeling, so we can see the bare wood underneath. So I'm just going to pick a little tone within there. And the way to get your eyedropper tool, if you haven't changed any settings, it probably will, for you, it will probably be this little square ticker here. You should hit that and that'll open up your color picker. For me, I've changed my preferences. So my color picker is just me holding down my finger. So anytime I hold down my finger, I can drag it to pick a color. Cool. So once you have this color, we're going to go to our brush library here. We're going to go to our artistic brushes here. And this leather wood brush is going to help us achieve this kind of flaking look very easily. Make your brush pretty small. And we're just going to draw in. As you can see, that's pretty large. So make your brush even smaller. Probably just take it all the way down to the smallest it can go. Yeah, that's what we want. That's what we want. Expand it a little bit. So you're going to tap this. You can actually drag your cursor or your pen out to help you get a little bit more accurate control over picking a size. So if you just tap here and drag your pen out and then drag it up, you'll see that even though your size is still 1%, your brush is getting bigger. So it's using smaller increments to increase the size of your brush. So make our brush a little larger. There we go, that's better. We're just gonna come in here and start to add some of this flaking, more distressed areas in. As you can see, I'm just doing gentle vertical strokes. So just go up and down. Have fun with it, you know, add it in where you want to add it in. So I'm just going to keep adding this texture in, and I'm going to speed this part of the video up, and I will see you when I am done. So I've added in some more kind of distressing here. Some of the spots are a little bit too much for me, so I'm going to erase some spots. And I also want to erase with the same brush that I'm painting with right now, so it keeps that same texture. So the way to do that is to just long press on the eraser tool until you see erase with current brush pop up. And that means it's going to select the current brush that you're using as the eraser. So now that I have that set as the eraser here, so you can see artistic leatherwood, but we're in the eraser. I'm just gonna lower my opacity a little bit and come back in and just clean up some spots that got a little too heavy. So I'm done cleaning that up. As you can see, I just erased a little bit just to help it kind of blend a little bit better. Obviously, it's still gonna look pretty drastically different than what's there, but we'll blend it out later, trust me. So right here, we're gonna go ahead and rename layer 4. So now we're gonna do the same thing, but we're gonna pick a darker version of whatever color your door is. So we're gonna make a new layer. Make it a clipping mask, so layer 5, and make sure it's on top of everything else, not the sketch lines. So we're gonna come in here, select the general color of the door, and then I'm just gonna take my color picker here and drag that color down to get somewhere up in there. So we're on layer 5, go back to our brush tool, and we still have our leatherwood brush, so we're good to go. We're gonna do the same exact thing we did for our light colors. And you can introduce some variation here by making some, you know, cracks and things like that as well if you wanted to. Or you can keep it simple and just do up and down strokes. So I am done adding in my dark color here. So once again, we're just gonna come here, rename our layer. So I'm just gonna name this additional texture dark. So looking at this now, the light texture is still kind of screaming at me. So I think I'm gonna reduce the opacity on that layer. So you can either tap 2 fingers on a layer like that, and it'll bring up your opacity, and you can slide to the left. Just reduce that a little bit until it looks a little bit more natural and not as stark. Somewhere in the 70 range looks good to me. And if you can't get that opacity gesture to work, just go to your layer and tap the N here, and then your opacity is also right there. So you can adjust it there as well. So next up comes the really fun part where we start to really make this door pop and stand out. And we're gonna really start to define all these different intricate trim work pieces and things like that. So we're gonna start to add shadows. So go ahead and create a new layer. Make sure it's clipped. We're gonna come to our color picker here, So you should already have a fairly dark color of your base color selected. So we're just gonna take that color and just drag it a little further down. So it's just a little darker here. Not all the way towards black. So this is like a really, really deep green. Now we're gonna switch brushes here. So we're gonna come here, go to our painting section, and let's just use an acrylic brush. Why not? Or you can use a round brush, flat brush. Great. So now we're back to layer 6. There should be nothing on that layer. We have our brush selected. Change the size a little bit, just so it's a little small. And basically what we're gonna do here is follow this first kind of line here that's on the sketch. So if we're looking at this door, these first 2 lines are like a decorative trim that's around the door, like the door jamb. And then everything else within that is obviously the door. So we're gonna start to define this door jamb out a little bit and just build our way in and defining each layer as we go. And you'll really start to see the door stand out. Because right now, obviously it looks flat because there's nothing giving it dimension. So we're gonna add that in. So what we're gonna do here, let me zoom in for you. My brush is kind of big, but that's fine. The size is at 3%. Yeah, that'll work. Let me just go a little bit bigger, sorry. So pick your brush around 3 to 4%. So we're just gonna basically draw in our shadow and make sure it overlaps the line. Obviously, I know the shadow won't look like this. We're gonna actually end up trimming out the part where we don't want the shadow to be. But I actually have found that I create better shadows when I just kind of overlap the lines, even though the shadow doesn't need to go here. It actually just needs to go in this recess. It just creates a better effect at the end of the day. So go ahead and just draw in a rough shadow. Make sure you're overlapping those lines right there. A quick way to make a straight line in Procreate is you draw your line quickly and just hold your pen down, and then it'll make a line. So then you can just let your pen go. Now you have a line. You might have to do this a couple times to get it to be a little bit more opaque because we're working with a brush that has texture. If you're working with a round brush, you would probably be fine because you could just make the line and it would be a solid texture. But since this brush has a little bit of grit to it, we have to come over it a couple times just to make sure it looks it's dark. So drag, hold, let go. Cool. So once you're done with that step, it should look something like this. Like I said, you should have this dark line kind of crossing over your trim here. That's what you want. It looks rough, but I promise you we're gonna clean it up right now. So what we're gonna do now is blur. So we're gonna go to our adjustments panel here, hit Gaussian blur. It'll bring up this menu at the top. And the way you blur out anything, you put your Apple Pencil on the screen and simply just drag to the right. You'll see that number start to increase and you'll see your lines start to blur out more and more. Now, if we go really far, you blurred it so much that you don't even see the line anymore, which is obviously not what we want. So in reality, the shadows are fairly harsh lines, so you shouldn't blur this too much. I would say between 3 to 5%. So I think somewhere 5 looks good to me. So we're gonna blur it to 5%. Once you're done, just let go. That looks good. Zoom out, make sure that it all looks good. And we're gonna exit out of there. Now, as you can see, it blurred over our lines. And always just kind of go back in here and check and make sure you aren't drawing on your sketch layer. Actually, to prevent that, we're gonna go ahead and just slide to the left on our layer and lock it. That's gonna prevent us from moving this layer or accidentally drawing on it or anything like that. So go ahead and lock that layer for now. If we need to use it later, we can unlock it. So come back to layer 6. Now we want that shadow here to stay in the recess, but we don't want it to be on top, because if we're imagining that this first set of trim work here is on its own plane, then it insets a little bit and that's on its own plane, the shadow would be in this crevice, not on this face. So we're just gonna erase the shadow from the first face here. How we're gonna do that is go to your selection tool. You can either go to freehand or rectangular, and we're gonna select the area where the trim is right now. So I'm just gonna do freehand. I'm gonna come here, just start somewhere outside your image. It doesn't even matter. So I'm just gonna start here. We're gonna tap there, scroll up, tap. And we're just gonna do this until we select the whole outer piece of trim. Cool, and once I have it out here, since this is the part I wanna delete, I'm gonna just take my selection up and around and connect it back. So once again, so now that I have the door frame selected almost all the way, you can just circle it around because nothing's there anyways, and just select it that way. And we're gonna swipe down with 3 fingers and cut it. Cool, so now as you can see, we've cut out the shadow from the area that's sitting the closest towards us. So this first piece of trim. So you should only have the shadow underneath there. And as you can see, we're already starting to just build that depth. It already now looks like this door has dimensional trim. So we're just gonna keep doing this. So in the next layer, we're gonna do the same exact thing we just did, but for this next inset here. And I like to do these on different layers just so I can be in control of the blending. So what we're gonna do here is hit plus one more time. So on layer 7, clip it down, grab your brush and start to draw in your shadow again. I think I'm actually gonna switch to the flat brush just to make it a little easier. But like I said, it doesn't really matter what brush you use as long as you get a solid line. So we're making our line, making sure it's overlapping the part that we don't want shadow on, and we can come back and erase it out later. It's important that you do these on different layers, and you can merge it down later, but if you do it on different layers now, you have an easier time with blurring and erasing. If I were to do this all on one layer, it would be really tricky for me to try to isolate specific parts of the shadow that I wanted gone without messing up the shadow next to it. So I just keep it all on different layers for now, and then we'll merge it all down at the end. So let me just check here. Great, so I have my shadow in here. You can see that it's overlapping the line. So we're gonna go to our blur, and our adjustments, Gaussian blur. I'm just gonna blur it out 5% like we did the first line. Actually, we might do a little bit less on this one. Yeah, we're gonna do a little less. I blurred this to about 4%. So now, as you can see, when we blurred that out, the blur bleeded in both directions. So now we have blur adding onto this piece of trim, and we don't want that to stay there, so we're just gonna erase that out as well. So let me show you a different way. So remember, like I said, we could either come here with our eraser tool and physically erase out the shadow like that, up into that line, but that's gonna take forever. So go to your selection tool. Let me show you how to do it with rectangle. So go to rectangle here and just start anywhere just off your canvas or off the door and just start to make a square. And then you can just use the square to make a selection right up to that line there. Once you have that, swipe down with 3 fingers and hit cut. So you can see it's already starting to clear out pieces. And we're just gonna do that for this side and for this side as well. So hit rectangle, start anywhere outside here, and just drag it down until you get to that line, somewhere in there. Do the same thing for this side, so just tap again. Drag it down. And then we're gonna swipe down with 3 fingers and hit cut. Alrighty, so this is what the door should be looking like now. As you can see, we're really starting to define the features of this door. So you can see we have this door jamb here that has two faces or two pieces of trim that kind of make up this detailing. The first face is here, then it recesses in, that's the second face, and then it recesses into the door itself. And we've achieved that with two shadows that are on different layers. So layer 6 is our first shadow here. If we turn it off, we can see what that's looking like. And then layer 7 is our second shadow here as well. Now I'm very happy with these two shadows, so I'm gonna go ahead and merge them together and then just name that layer the door frame shadow. So the way you're gonna do that is just pinch together layers 6 and 7. So take your fingers and just pinch them together like that. And that should merge them together. Cool, so now we have our door frame shadow on its own layer. So we're basically gonna rinse and repeat. We're gonna do the same thing, but now we're gonna start working on the trim here. But actually, before we do that, we're gonna add some depth to the inside of the trim. So you can think of this as being a flat trim. It goes down a little bit, it recesses down, and then it comes back up to the same level. So because it goes down, it's gonna be in shadow. So we're gonna basically add some shadow in these thicker parts in the frame before we add the shadow to the outside. So a quick way we're gonna do this is actually by using our sketch lines as a reference to select the area in between. Now, because the sketch is so clean and all the lines, are closed, there's no gaps, I can use it to help me select the areas in between. We're gonna have our sketch lines layer here, and we wanna select from this layer. So we're gonna hit our selection tool. We're actually gonna go to automatic down here. And make sure you have add on, because that way we can make all of our selections at once. Basically what add does is allows you to make your first selection, and then you can continue to add selections onto that to make one complete selection at the end, instead of doing like selecting this, adding the color, selecting this, adding the color. You could just do it all at once. So make sure you have automatic selected. We have add on, and we're on our sketch lines layer. So we're just gonna select this area in between the smaller frame here and the larger square that's in the center. So just move down. We're gonna come down here, do the same thing, do the same thing. Actually, let me show you something really quick before we select all of this. If you're ever getting it where your selection is doing something like this, where it's selecting the whole page, that means your threshold is way too high. And the way you lower that is by doing this. So basically what you do is, say if we go back, so we'll tap to go back, act like we're making our selection. But as you make your selection, once you tap down, do not lift your pencil up and just slide your pencil to the left. So watch me do it. So we'll select here. It's way too high. It says selection threshold is 100%. So just take your pen, drag it to the left until it starts to only select the area that you want it to select. Cool. So you see if I slide it to the left, to the right, it's not doing anything. That's kind of where we want it to be. So let's just have it at like 45, somewhere in there. Now we can go and select everything else. Select, select. Now this is, like I said, we're just selecting here. This is not painting this blue or anything. And we're still on our sketch lines. So once you tap back into layers, you can see that the selection came up. We're gonna go to make a new layer and just fill it with, honestly, you can just fill it with that same dark color we were using for the graining earlier or for the shadows. So just go ahead and drag it over, drop it in, and you can fill each one. Now, if you want to fill this all at the same time, here is another quick trick. It's the same thing that we just did with the threshold being low. In this case, you want your threshold to be high because we're trying to fill all the gaps at one time. So what you can do is drag your color here and just drag your cursor to the right all the way until it goes to 100%, and it'll fill all the color up. So let me do that one more time. So drag your color in, don't lift your pencil up, and then just drag your pen to the right and off your screen basically, and it'll fill all the color. We can get rid of that selection now. Great, so now we have this kind of inset part of the door trim. We have shadow on that layer. So if we go back to our layers panel, that shadow is actually above our sketch line. So we just want to drag it down underneath. And then once you drag it underneath, it should automatically clip to that layer. But if it doesn't, you'll just go here and make sure you turn on the clipping mask. So now that we have that shadow, it's actually way too harsh right now. So we're just gonna tap twice on that layer to bring up our opacity. And we're just gonna lower our opacity, I would say to about 70%. And then we're gonna change our blend mode here. So we're gonna come to our layer 7, tap the N, change our blend mode to multiply. I just like to use multiply for shadows. I don't know if there's any science behind it, but I just like how it looks because it still kind of shows the texture underneath. And they're just gonna adjust even further our opacity. So maybe, let's just go for 50 right now. It still may be too harsh. Yeah, this seems better. So actually we're gonna go to about 30%. So as you can see now, we zoom out, we can see that we've added in shadow here, and it's making the square here and then the trim around it kind of pop out. Now to make the door recess again, we're gonna add shadow to the outside of these pieces of trim. And it's just how we did the door frame here. We're just gonna add in our shadow, draw it in. We're gonna blur it out, and then we're gonna erase it away from where we don't want it. So go ahead and add a new layer. It'll be layer 8. Turn on your clipping mask. We're gonna grab a flat brush, and we're just gonna do the same thing we've been doing. So make sure that dark color here is selected. And then just go ahead and draw in your shadow around the outside of the trim. So you can see I'm going on the outside here. All right, so we've drawn all of our lines in. As you can see, once again, they're overlapping the parts that they don't need to cover, but we're just gonna erase it out later. So now that we have all of our lines, we're on layer 8. Go ahead and go to your adjustments panel, Gaussian blur. I'm just gonna blur it out. So you just swipe to the right slowly. You won't even have to blur this one as much because it's a smaller area. So probably, let's go with 3%. Great, and now that we have our blur at 3% on that layer, go to our selections menu. We're gonna go to rectangular for this one. Hit rectangular, and we're just gonna make selections of this whole entire square and cut it because we wanna get rid of the shadow that's sitting within the square we're about to make. So just come here, tap, hold down, make this square. So just follow your lines. Once you have that selection here, swipe down with 3 fingers and hit cut. And as you can see, all that shadow has disappeared, but we just have the shadow that's on the outside, which is where we want it to be. So go ahead and just do that for every segment of trim here. Swipe down 3 fingers, cut. Sometimes it's hard to make a selection that is this big. Sometimes I'll just switch back to freehand and I'll just tap on all the 4 corners until I make my selection and then cut it out. But I'm just gonna go with rectangular for right now and just eyeball it. No, that was not good. Let's go back. Yeah, there we go. Cool, and to speed this up, since I have add on, I can just keep adding selections to this and just cut it all out at once. So that's what we're gonna do for the rest of this. So we're just gonna select all of these at one time. Draw your rectangle, select. Draw your rectangle, boom. Okay, now that I have all my selections, I'm gonna swipe down with 3 fingers and hit cut. Great. Cool, so now you see we've added the shadow to the outside of the trim work to help it look like it's raised. But as you can see, it's a little too harsh right now. So we're just gonna adjust our opacity. And as you know, tap with 2 fingers on layer 8 and just slide that back until it looks natural. Yeah, well, I'm at 64 right now. So somewhere between 60 and 70. Perfect. So now if we zoom out, we can see we actually have a really good looking door here. We can see all the features starting to pop out. Obviously, we still have our really dark line art here, like the initial sketch is still visible. And I'll show you how to conceal that a little bit later towards the end. But for now, the base of the door is there. It's looking really good. So now we're just gonna build up a little bit more texture on the door, add a doorknob, and then go from there. Alrighty, so next we're gonna add a little distressing and stuff to the bottom of the door. So how we're gonna do this, we're gonna add a new layer, per usual, gonna clip it. We're gonna come to our brush panel here and go to, I think it's industrial. Yeah, we're gonna go to industrial and then we're gonna pick Rusted Decay. I love this brush a lot. It's like a really like gritty, it just adds grunge and I just love, that's kind of like my vibe, my aesthetic. I love like kind of grungy, industrial, creepy looking stuff. So that's what we're gonna do to this door. Just a little bit, not too much. I find it just adds a little bit of depth to, you know, gives it a little bit of character, gives it a little bit of story. We're not trying to make like a spooky, scary door, but it's kind of giving that vibe with the chipped away paint, but it's whatever. So we have our Rusted Decay brush selected. Make sure we're on layer 9. We're still gonna use that same color, that really dark base color of your door. Let's play with the size. Go a little bit larger for this one. Let's test out 15 first. Keep our opacity pretty low so we can control it a little bit more. I'm just gonna slowly start to darken the bottom of this door in like a little vignette shape, a little halo. So just kind of doing this stroke here until I'm building up. Now this is slowly doing it. If I want to do this a little bit faster, I can just raise my opacity a little bit and it'll help me achieve the look a little bit faster. I'm liking that. So make sure you kind of stay zoomed out. So you can see I'm starting to naturally kind of add the shadow here at the bottom, which looks really, really nice. It's adding a lot of character to our door here. So just keep doing that until you get to a part where you like it. I'm kind of liking this where it is. That looks really good. Like I said, I like to use, so we're gonna go back to our layer. And as you can see, we kind of have that shape down there. If I were to unclip this shape, this is what it would look like. But once again, because we're clipping it down, it's all of this is clipped down to this rectangle here. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the blend mode of this layer to multiply. As you see, that's gonna darken your layer like immediately. So it made it much darker, but it's still allowing the texture that's underneath to kind of show through. And I really like that look. So here's what it looks like on normal. It still looks fine on normal, like don't get me wrong, but something about multiply just really makes it pop. I really like it. And if that's still too strong for you, of course, just adjust your opacity until it looks good. A lot of this is about personal preference, what looks good to you. You know, there's no one right way to do any of this, so have fun with it. I like that. That looks really good. It looks a little harsh, but I think once we darken the background, it'll even out. I actually want to add a little bit more, like, so what's happening here at the bottom of the door, I kind of want to do that for the top here, but not the trim, so just the actual door. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and add a new layer, hit the plus. We're gonna have layer 10, make sure it's clipped. And with that same exact brush, Rusted Decay, we're gonna come in here and slowly add in a little darkening to the top of the door, but we're gonna erase it away in a sec. So you'll see what I mean. Lower my opacity a little bit. That looks really good. Let's just go ahead and turn it to multiply right now, just to see what it looks like before we commit. And yeah, I think I like that. Let me add a little more. Why not? Yeah, that looks good. I like that. So we're gonna cut the part we don't need. So I just want this on the actual door itself. So I'm gonna take it away from everywhere else. So we're gonna go to select, make sure we're on rectangular here. And once again, we're just gonna start outside, just drag it down. We don't want it on the trim, hit the door trim at all. So we're gonna make sure we select both layers of that. Make that selection, swipe down, hit cut. So you can see, you should see a clean line appear again. We're just gonna do that for the two sides as well. So drag your rectangle down past where you need to go. And then start here, just drag it down this way and then expand it out to there. Swipe down with 3 fingers, hit cut. So now we kind of have that shadowing and that kind of grunge look just on the door, but not on the frame. But at the bottom, we have it over everything. So I'm just gonna lessen that. We're gonna adjust the opacity once again. Somewhere in there. Yeah, I like that. Cool, so at this point, this is what your door should look like. And this is what our layers are looking like. Go ahead and just rename these. All right, so now we're gonna move on to the doorknob itself. This is fairly easy. So we're gonna start with a new layer. So it's gonna be layer 11 for us if you've been keeping up with this, but if you haven't, just start a new layer. But this one, we're not gonna clip it to the door, actually. We're just gonna keep it separate like that. Now we're gonna make a circle selection. So go to our selection tool, go to ellipse here. And the way we're gonna do this, to make a perfect circle selection, you just start, just put your pen down and just make a general kind of circle shape. You see, as you stretch it out, you can start to either make a really narrow ellipse, or you can stretch it out to make a really wide circle. So we're just gonna stretch it out to about our doorknob shape, but to make sure it's a perfect circle, once you do that, keep your pen down and just put your finger down and then start to drag. You should see that it's only staying a circle. So if you lift your finger up, you can get an ellipse or a circle, but if you put your finger down, one finger down, it'll only make a circle. So just make a circle about yay big, about doorknob size. Then we're gonna come to our color picker here. And we're gonna go for like a brassy doorknob, I guess. So kind of come into gold, or not gold, to this like orange territory. And then just drag your color picker kind of down. This really dark, basically brown, yeah. My brain stopped working for a second. So once we have that kind of really dark brown color, just drag it into our circle like that, and then turn off your selection tool. So now we have a circle. So obviously this doorknob is way too high. We're just gonna take our move tool, so tap the little arrow here. Now we can move our circle around. We're just gonna move it down to about doorknob height. And give or take, it's probably around there. And just make sure it's centered between the door frame and this kind of first piece of trim here. So perfect. It's looking a little big too right now. I'm gonna size it down a little bit. So just gonna do that. Make sure I'm on uniform here. I'm just gonna grab a corner and just kind of size it down a little bit and then reposition it back into the center there. Okay, yeah, that looks better. Cool. So to quickly color in this doorknob, it shouldn't take us much time at all. We're just gonna go to our layers here. So on layer 11, we're gonna just color straight onto this doorknob. We're not gonna worry about doing what we did here for the door. So the way to keep our color within this doorknob, we're gonna turn on alpha lock. So go ahead and tap on your layer, hit alpha lock right here, and you should see this checkerboard pattern appear behind your circle in the preview window. That means once you start to draw, it's only gonna appear where the circle is. It's not gonna go outside the circle. So we're gonna stay on layer 11. We're gonna go to our brushes, go to painting. I'm just gonna do a little bit more of a textured brush. So let's just go with acrylic. Why not? Come back to our color here. We're just gonna slide our color picker just straight up to pick like a mid-tone color. Lower our opacity so we have more control over how we lay in the ink. And then we're gonna adjust our sides a little bit. Cool, and then we're just gonna, actually it's a little too small, so we're gonna go up a little higher. And I'm just kind of tapping and slowly adding in that color. I'm just kind of tapping in the center and moving it out. I want to keep that dark base color visible on the edge because that'll help us make it look like it's rounded. Cool, so once you kind of have it looking like that, come to our color picker and just slide your picker up a little higher. Just a brighter value of that color. Kind of same thing, just tapping a little bit. Make your sides a little smaller now so you can start to really control where that paint is going. You can kind of bleed it out a little bit. I'm just lightly tapping and lightly dragging my brush. Cool, now that you have that, we're gonna go for a really hot spot to really make it look brassy and kind of, you know, like it has a little shine to it. So we're gonna come to a really bright orange here and make our brush even smaller. And then same thing, just kind of tapping and moving your brush around until we form this really hot spot right here. So that's what it looks like when we're all the way zoomed in. Obviously, like I said, we never want to be that zoomed in when we're working, but if you need to be, you can. Great, so we've added in that really bright spot there, and then we might go one step higher and then to the left a little bit. It's like for that last little razzle dazzle. Just to really take it home. Cool, so that's what we should end up looking like, something like that. If something got too harsh, so like that got a little bit too harsh for me, I'm just going to smudge it out with a soft brush. Actually, I can just smudge it with the same brush. So the way to do that is our smudge tool is right here, the little finger. Just hold down until you see smudge with current brush pop up. And if that doesn't work, you can always just go to find the brush you were using to paint. So come here, turn our opacity pretty low. Oh, and the brush size needs to go down. And then we're just gonna come in here and like smudge it out. Make sure you're zoomed out when you do this so you can see what's actually happening and you're not just like, you know. Yeah, I like that. That's good. So I just smudged it out a little bit, got rid of the harshness on the lines there. I don't want it to be too smooth, but cool. And then when you zoom out, it just looks like a little doorknob. And as you can see, we did that all on one layer very quickly. It didn't take us much time at all. That's because we used alpha lock, which allowed us to stay like we were coloring within the lines, basically. Let's go ahead and rename that doorknob. Now we're gonna add a little cast shadow under our doorknob as if the light is hitting it and just allowing a little shadow to be formed. So the way we're gonna do this is duplicating our doorknob. So we're gonna swipe left on our layer, hit duplicate. You should see one pop up underneath. So the one that popped up underneath, we're gonna make sure we turn alpha lock off actually on both of these. So turn the alpha lock off on the top and the bottom. So we're gonna take our bottom one. You won't be able to see it right now because it's directly underneath this one. So go ahead and move it down. So take our move tool right here. And we're just gonna drag it down a little bit here because we want our shadow to be directly underneath the doorknob. Great, now that you have that placed, go ahead and go to your adjustments panel. So click that, go to hue, saturation, brightness. And we're just gonna lower the brightness on this doorknob pretty much until it turns black. As you can see, I don't even need to go all the way down to the bottom because it turns black right around there. Cool, now that we have that layer black, your layer panel should look like this. We should have a really dark doorknob and then the main one on top. Make sure the dark one is underneath. And we're just gonna come here and go to motion blur for this one. Tap on that. Now motion blur works a little bit different than Gaussian blur. Gaussian blur just kind of blurs out in every direction. Motion blur is only gonna blur in the direction that your pencil starts to go in. So if I wanna blur this doorknob down, I'm just gonna start here and drag my pencil down this way. As you can see, it's starting to blur in the direction of my pen. If I were to go this way and start to move, it's gonna blur horizontally. I could even go diagonal. I could really go any direction I want. But like I said, we wanna go up and down. So we're just gonna put our pencil on the screen and then drag down a little bit, probably to about 10 to 12%, until we get a nice little shadow underneath. And now we have a doorknob. I'm pretty happy with my door here. I'm not gonna make any more changes. If you wanna add any more details or things like that, feel free to. I'm gonna stop here. And we're just gonna merge all this down to one layer, except for the sketch line. So make sure that stays where it is. So what we're gonna do here is, first we're gonna merge our doorknob and our doorknob shadow together. So just pinch those two together. So make sure the first one is selected. Take your fingers and just pinch them together. I'm gonna do the same thing for the door. An easy way to do this, so you don't have to pinch all these layers together, is just to slowly pinch them together. So maybe pinch the first like 5 or 6 together like this, and then pinch the rest together. So let me show you that one more time. So you'll pinch your first couple together with the base shape, and make sure that's in there. Pinch it down, and then you pinch these down as well. And then we'll pinch our doorknob with the base shape. And now we have our door on one layer. Now, obviously at this point, we cannot go back. We cannot change anything about this. So this is a destructive edit. If you don't want this to be a destructive edit, what you can do, if you have enough space, I'm just gonna go back before we keep tapping until we go back. Now we have it all back again. I'm just gonna make this all into a group. So swipe to the right, just keep swiping to the right on all our layers, including the doorknob, but not the sketch layer. Just hit group. It's gonna make a new group for us, and then we can flatten that group down by hitting this little arrow. That will contract it back down, and then we can just change this group and name it door. And what we're gonna do is duplicate this group. So it's gonna create a whole nother, the exact same thing. And we're gonna flatten one of the groups down. So we're just gonna flatten this first one, just tap it and hit flatten. And then turn this layer off. Or this is a group, so we'll turn this group off. Now you can see we have our door flattened. But say later on, if we wanna change the color of the door, do something different, change the doorknob out, we still have our door folder or group here that we can go back to and change and edit later. So now I'm gonna rename this door flat. And then we have our door group. So we're gonna leave that group alone. Actually, in order to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, we can just swipe to the left on it and hit lock. So that's gonna lock that group. So now we can't do anything to the group other than turn it on or off right now. Cool, so now that we have our door flat, first we're gonna change the background color a little bit. Should have did this earlier, but so go ahead and just tap background color, that preview. It's gonna turn into like a charcoal-y gray. So probably somewhere down here is where you wanna be. So now we're gonna unlock our sketch layer, which is once again the black lines here. So you can see if I turn the sketch layer off, we can still pretty much define the door based on the shadows, but we kind of lose a little bit of the detail that's necessary for our eyes to kind of make out things if we don't have these lines. But also these lines being stark black or like straight black is just not appealing. So we're just gonna kind of disguise it a little bit. So what we're gonna do is take our flat door image, swipe to the left and duplicate it. So we should have 2 now. Drag one of them above your sketch lines here. And as you can see, since it's above the sketch lines, it made the sketch lines go away. But that's not all we're gonna do here. So make sure we unlock our sketch lines layer. And we're gonna take this door flat, the first one on top of the sketch lines, we're gonna clip it to the sketch lines. So hit clipping mask. And now the color of the door is gonna match with the lines. I hope that made sense. It probably didn't. So basically what we did here is since we clipped the picture of the door to the lines, wherever the lines are on the sketch, it's gonna kind of match the image. So you can see when I clipped it, it still looks exactly the same, and then the lines have disappeared. So if I turn that layer off, the lines come back, right? So we can see the black lines, but because that layer is clipped, if I turn it on, the lines go away. Now we want some of that definition back, so we're gonna darken this layer a little bit. So make sure we have our door flat, the top layer selected. Go to hue, saturation, brightness, and it's gonna lower the brightness, and then just kind of watch. You'll see the lines start to reappear. It's how you know you've done it correctly. So we don't want to darken it too much. We just kind of want to bring back a little bit of the definition without losing the details of the door. So like that. So I have mine, I lowered it to 39%, but you can play around with it. Some areas are going to get darker faster than other areas, so you just kind of have to play around and look at the picture as a whole to make sure those really dark black lines aren't super apparent. And now basically what that did is if I turn off the door flat, so the bottom one here, and we look at our lines, we can see that our lines now have color in them, and those colors kind of match where that color is lying on the actual door. So it makes the lines just look less apparent. And if they're still a little bit too present for you, which for me, they kind of are, I think I'm just gonna turn the opacity down a little bit. Yeah, like that. Cool, so now we have our lines. You see we have door flat, this clip to sketch lines. Let's go ahead and just change that layer. Actually, we can just merge it down at this point. So just merge this clipped layer to the sketch lines layer, just pinch them together like that. And now your sketch lines are still there, but they just have a little color that more closely matches the door. So it's not pure black, it's just darker. Alrighty, so we are here now. We have our door on its own layer. We have our sketch lines on their own layer. Now we're gonna get to the fun part of like adding in the shadow to the ground, adding in the reflection, and doing like the little magical swoosh. So if you want to stop here, you totally can. At this point, you have successfully made this really cool looking door. You could group these two things together and flatten it, and then you have a door that you can now use to like repeat if you want to do multiple doors that look like this, you know, and use this. Maybe you want to use this door in a bigger piece, things like that. But this is just kind of, this really combined everything we learned in that first video, kind of like where we are right now. So if you want to do like the next step in making the door look a little bit more magical and having like the little magical swoosh like you saw in the beginning, just keep watching from this point. I think first we need to add like a little shadow at the bottom just to kind of give it a horizon kind of plane to make it look like it's grounded, because now it's just kind of floating in space. So we want to ground it. So what we're going to do is open up our group here. So we're going to add a new layer, drag that layer underneath the door. So it's still going to be in the group. So you see if I collapse the group down, it's still in the group, but it's just underneath the door now. So we're just going to come in with, at this point, we can just probably go pretty much all the way black, really charcoaly color. And then we can also just use the same acrylic brush, that'll work. And we're just going to add in a straight shadow across the bottom. So probably start like, let me raise my opacity up. So we'll probably start like here-ish. And you just extend that about equidistant to the other side of the door. We'll say about there. And just draw that in a couple of times. You don't have to be too precise with it because we will blur it as we have done everything else. So just make a couple strokes. Get this as dark as you want it. Nothing too specific, because at this point we don't really have a light source per se. I mean, we're going to add one in, but right now the door is kind of just floating in space. So we're just going to put a pretty generic shadow at the bottom. So we see we have our line here at the bottom. It's very crooked right now, but it won't really matter after you blur it. So make sure that's on its own layer. It is, so we're good to go. So go ahead and hit adjustments, Gaussian blur. Just going to blur, nope, just kidding. Motion blur. And then we're just going to blur it horizontally here. Like so, like that. And you can kind of adjust your pen up and down, but I'm kind of just going straight across. Yeah, I'll say right about in the 50 range. That'll work. You see my shadow is like sitting in front of the door a little bit, so we can just adjust that by just moving our shadow so it's behind the door a little. There we go. So go to distort if you need to move it, and you can kind of just adjust it accordingly. There we go. So now the shadow's kind of sitting behind the door and not in front of it. Perfect. So now we have our shadow, and as we can see now, the door looks like it's grounded. Even though there's nothing happening necessarily in the background, it does look like it's planted firmly on whatever ground this is. So next we're just quickly going to do the reflection of the door. Reflections are super easy. You basically just duplicate whatever the thing you want to reflect is and flip it the other way, and you've got a reflection. So now that I think about it, I actually don't want this in a group. I think it's just going to make our lives a little bit more difficult right now. So we're just going to drag this out the group. And all you do is just take your layer and just drag it downward. So you just take your layer, okay, if I can pick it up. So take your layer and just kind of drag it down and place it again. It should pop out of the group. So now if we collapse the group, we just have our sketch lines in the group. And we can take that out of the group as well. And then just delete the group. So now we're back. Let's actually keep it that way. So now we have everything back as it is normal. I'm going to go ahead and just combine my sketch lines with the door, just because I don't think I'm going to change that anymore. So that makes our lives easier. So now we just have our door layer and our floor kind of cast shadow. So now we're going to move on to adding the reflection of the door to the ground. And what that's going to do for us is just give this piece a little bit of visual interest and also make the ground appear as if it's glossy. So yeah, let's just go ahead and do it. So what you're going to do here is take your door layer, which is now one layer with the lines, no more lines. It's going to duplicate that. So we should have two. So if I move the second one over, I can see I have an exact copy of the first. Go ahead and keep it lined up though. What we're going to do is flip it vertically and then drag it down. So you can see if I flip it vertically, that's what it looks like. So it just basically flipped the door the opposite way. Now I'm just going to drag it down underneath the door and line it up exactly with the bottom here. And your snapping will help you line it up, because as you can see, once I line it up, we get the guides that show that it's all in line. So once you have that, just let go. And then you can zoom in and check, but you want to make sure it's butted up all the way against the bottom of the other door. So it looks like it's meeting right there. So now we have that, but obviously that doesn't look super realistic. So what we're going to do is, firstly, we're going to do a little blur on it. So we're going to come to our adjustment panel and motion blur. We're just going to blur this small portion down here just vertically a little bit. I would say about 9–10% looks good to me. Good, now we have that. That's looking a little bit more believable, but opacity will help us take it to the next level. So we're going to come here and our door reflection layer. Let's just go ahead and rename that. We're just going to knock down the opacity a little bit. Or a lot of it, actually, not even a little. Maybe somewhere in the 30% range. Yeah, like that. And if we zoom out, now you can see it looks like our door has a reflection, and it looks like our ground has a little bit of gloss or something to it. So that's a nice little effect. So now we're entering into the last steps here. So at this point, we're just gonna add like a little bit of that glow to make the door look a little bit magical, like maybe something's going on. It's giving a little bit of Encanto vibes, you know. So go ahead and just hit the plus layer. At this point, you can pick any color you want to be your magical glow. Maybe I'll do, maybe just like sea foamy green. And we can change this later. So we'll just start with that for now. So pick a color, fairly saturated color, anything you want. We'll come back out of here, make sure we're on this layer. Now we're gonna go to our brush panel and we're gonna pick a, honestly, we can probably just stay with the acrylic brush. I think that'll work. Let's just stay with the acrylic brush for now. And take our opacity like about 50% or lower at this point. Brush size, And basically I want you to just slowly start kind of sketching in the shape of your little ethereal light trail here. I don't know what we want to call this. Our magical light trail. There we go. So you don't have to be too specific, you know, just have some fun, make a cool shape. I'll show you shortly how to adjust the shape and make it, you know, do things after you kind of have this base shape planted down. So right now I've done this kind of like S from here, little S bend to behind the door here. And then maybe let's have a piece that kind of branches off. It completes a different swirl over here. Maybe one that leads your eye to the doorknob or something like that. I like that. And then one that kind of just flows up here. Right now, like I said, we're just blocking in the shape, making sure it's something we like. I like that. I think that looks good. Maybe we'll have another trail that kind of leads down here off to the back of the door, something like that. So here's my general shape if you wanted to just mimic that, or you can make up your own shape. So we have it kind of starting behind the door, swirling around, then one end kind of trails off behind the door here. Then we branch off one more time. We have a swirl that kind of leads your eye to guide you to the doorknob, and then one that leads your eye back behind the door, and one that kind of just trails off into nothing. So now that we have that, we're just gonna work on making it thicker in spots and just look a little bit more clean. So you can come in with a larger brush at this point, have a little bit more intention to your strokes and how thick things are and things like that. So just play with it, have fun, nothing too specific. You can kind of leave these little parts you see where it's not like completed. It just kind of adds to it. So I don't think you need to be too specific. So I like how this is looking. I think this is good enough. And you don't want to spend, I mean, you don't need to spend too much time on this, but if you want to, by all means, you can keep going. So now that we have this general kind of swoosh, a good way to alter this, if you want to change something, you can actually go to liquify. So you go to your adjustments panel, this liquify option at the bottom here. I just use the push. This kind of works as a brush, so you can adjust the size of it and the pressure. This is what mine is set at right now. And you kind of can just use this to push and pull your shape to make it look a little bit more uniform, or, you know, smooth out the curves a little bit. Mine is looking pretty good, so I won't fuss with this too much, but that is one way you can adjust. All right, tap back out of that. Cool, so this is our swirl. First thing we're gonna do is duplicate this, just so we have a second one. So obviously we don't want it to look that intense, so we're just gonna turn this off for now. First thing, so we're gonna go back to the bottom swirl. We're just gonna blur it out a little bit. So we're gonna go over adjustments, Gaussian blur, and then just swipe to the right and just blur it out to about 10 to 12%, somewhere in there. We want it to look pretty soft. You shouldn't see the brush strokes on this one. We might blur it a little bit later, but for now, I think about 8 to 10% should work. Cool, we're gonna leave that as is for now. We're gonna come back to our top one and turn it on. And then we're gonna change the blend mode to this, for this one, and change it to add. So we're gonna swipe down, hit the N, swipe down until you get to add. And as you can see, it looks like it's glowing now, which is really fun. This glow is really, really strong, so we might just go to our opacity and lower it a little bit so you can hit the A and kind of adjust it until you find a good level that looks good to you. If you want it full strength, go for it. But I kind of like somewhere up in here, somewhere in the 60 range. It's not too jarring, but it gets the job done. So now we want to add some glow onto the door where the swirl is kind of crossing the door. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go to our door layer here. And as you guessed it, how we've been doing things in the past, we're going to hit the plus. We're going to clip this layer to the door. And then we're going to come in with a really soft airbrush. So go to your airbrushing, hit soft brush here. You're going to make it pretty large and turn your opacity fairly low. Have mine at about 16 right now. That way we can slowly add in the blue. And you kind of just want to follow the trail, and wherever it looks like it's crossing the door, just kind of follow it. You won't see much now, and I wouldn't go any darker than this, but we can adjust the blend mode on this layer to make it pop a little bit more. So let's just go ahead and play around with some options. So we're on our little glow layer that's on the door. Go to your blend mode here. So tap the N, and then we can kind of start to adjust the blend mode until we find something that looks pretty good. I wouldn't go too far down here. These won't really do much for us. I think add might be the best option for us right now. Either add or screen. We'll just do add again. Why not? So we're just going to change that to add. And then we're going to blur it out a little bit because it's looking a little harsh. You can see kind of like the lines on where it's crossing. So just on that same layer, adjustments, blur. Just blur it out ever so slightly, not too much. I kind of like it without the normal layer under it. You know what? Actually, yeah, I think we're gonna lose this layer underneath. So I had you duplicate it and then put it in add mode on top, but I kind of just like how it looks with just the add layer. So I think I'm gonna delete this, turn this layer that's underneath off. I won't delete it, I'll just turn it off. But if you wanna keep it on, go for it. All right, so we have our magical glow. I'm just gonna rename this layer. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this layer underneath. I don't need it. Like I said, if you want to keep it, go for it. And we're gonna name layer 17 door glow. Cool, so now we have our flat, we have our reflection, the cast shadow, the magical glow. Last thing to do really is to add a vignette and a little razzle dazzle. So let's go ahead and add our vignette in. So on the layer on top, go ahead and just take your color to black. And with a soft brush, and a pretty big brush at that, and a pretty low opacity, let's go to about 35, somewhere in there. We're just gonna start to draw in a vignette on our piece. You can draw this in pretty harsh because we're gonna blur it out anyways. So you just kind of wanna make this cone shape, this kind of circular lens shape. So we're gonna focus our eye in on the door by using this. So you can just draw it in pretty dark like that. And then we can blur it out the rest of the way. We said we have our vignette on this layer. Perfect. We're gonna go to adjustments. You guessed it, Gaussian blur, and just blur the black layer out until it looks pretty natural. You're gonna blur this pretty far out, actually. I would say somewhere up in I kind of like that. I would say like 70. Yeah, looks good. Looks good. Like you said, it kind of vignetted the outside, and it draws your eye in towards the door, and kind of makes the glow pop. Now that the background's a little darker, so it's a nice touch. Oh, okay, so now two more things, and then we're done. So we see our glow here. We need to add that reflection down below because it's not there right now. So we're just gonna take our magical glow layer, duplicate it. So go to move, then we're gonna flip vertical. So you can see it flipped our glow vertical, and then we're just gonna drag it down until it kind of lines up with the bottom of the door, because that's where the swirl here kind of goes to the bottom of the door. So we're gonna make sure this swirl also kind of goes to the same spot on the door. So as you can see, it looks like it's a mirror of the image that's actually happening up here. So that's what you want. So once you have that in position, so we can exit out of move, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna blur it with motion blur, just vertically a little bit, not much. So maybe about 12%, the magic number. And then we're gonna reduce the opacity. So have to tap the A or double tap on a layer, go to your opacity layer. We're just gonna knock it down. Because it's a reflection, so we're not seeing that much of it through the ground, but we still want it to be present. I would probably go a little less. Oh, I have it on 12% again. Wow, 12 is the magic number today, clearly. Then, okay, that was looking good. I like that. Let that go. So now I'm gonna add a little debris into my light source. So that's just a little, how I do that is I use a fine spatter, and I have these custom brushes that I made. I'll probably link them down below so you can use them as well, because this is not a brush that's native to Procreate. So this is a brush I made on my own for things like this. So I have this extra fine spatter brush, and I'm gonna use the same color that the glow is on a new layer on top of the glow. We're gonna change it to add blending mode. And then we're just gonna take this and kind of just draw little specks. You can't really see it. There, you can see it now. Yeah, we're just gonna draw. I just kind of lightly follow the path of where the light is, just to add a little something. I don't know, I just like it. It's not super apparent, but like when you get up close, you're like, oh, there's a little something happening in there. So that's just my little thing I like to do. Cool. You could even add it around the whole door if you really wanted to, because like if we're at this point thinking the door is like a magical door, maybe it has little specks around it, you know. Yeah, I like this. Looks good, looks good. Just rename that. I just like to call it debris. Oh, not decree. Debris. Nope. There we go. So now we have our debris layer. I think we need to add a little highlight to the door, like where these really bright things are. So let's go to our door layer, make a new layer and clip it to it. Also just gonna turn this to add. And then we're gonna find, let's just go back to, what brush are we using? This acrylic brush? Sure. Acrylic brush, fairly low opacity, pretty small. And then kind of just wherever the beam crosses the door, it's like adding in a pretty strong highlight there. So you can see here, it's just like a line. Maybe add isn't the answer, we'll see. And then on the top of the door, where it crosses the top, it goes behind the door. Just drawing in a little streak that way. It's crossing the trim here, so maybe we'll add a little bit on the trim. Same with this piece, because it's raised. I wouldn't like get too nitty gritty with it. Just kind of, like I said, wherever that beam is crossing, just hitting it real quick. I think we're gonna stop here. I think this is good. I've added a little highlight, as you can see, in little places. It's really subtle, but it's a nice little touch. And yeah, I think we're gonna call this good. I really like how this looks. If you wanna keep going, feel free to add, you know, what you want to it. But I think for the purposes of this video, we're gonna call this done. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this tutorial, and sticking along and kind of making this door with me. If you guys do go all the way through the tutorial and make this, you know, share it with me on Instagram or something like that. I would love to see kind of what you guys create. If you guys do a different interpretation of this door or anything like that. But like I said, the whole point of this video was to kind of take what we learned in part 1 and take all those things and put them together and actually use the skills and apply it to a project. At least for me, you know, I learn better by just doing it and hopping into it. So that's kind of why I wanted to make this follow-up video in addition to the first one. So I hope you found it useful. So hopefully you learned some skills and some things you can apply to like your digital art and to like your scenic design and your renderings and all that. So if you liked this video and you found it helpful, please consider sharing it to other people who might be interested. Also, please like, comment, and subscribe down below. Follow me on my social media. I will also put that down below. And that is all. I will see you guys in the next one. All right, bye.